Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're unpacking a paradigm-shifting strategy for digital wealth preservation. It's a concept that completely flips standard crypto advice right on its head: offshore cryptography. I mean, we always hear the phrase, not your keys, not your coins, right? But what if we need to go way beyond that? What if we actually need to build a literal legal fortress around those keys to truly secure our digital assets? Okay, let's dive into this with a question that might make some crypto purists, well, a little uncomfortable. Can a domestic judge force you to surrender your cryptocurrency seed phrase? For years, the ultimate mantra in the digital asset world has been holding your own private keys on a hardware wallet. The thought is basically, hey, if I have the physical device, my funds are totally untouchable. And against hackers or a collapsed exchange, that is absolutely true. But what happens when the threat isn't a hacker, but a direct legal mandate from a judge sitting in a courtroom in your own country? Suddenly, that trusty hardware wallet doesn't look like the impenetrable shield we all thought it was. The reality of legal compulsion is stark, and we actually have concrete examples of this playing out. Look at the stark 2026 legal precedents. It's a truly chilling scenario. Domestic judges have actively forced defendants to reveal their seed phrases. And the penalty for hiding behind technical encryption? Indefinite incarceration for contempt of court. Seriously, if a judge issues a direct turnover mandate and you refuse to hand over the keys to your cold storage, you aren't just facing financial penalties, you are facing actual jail time until you comply. The hardware wallet doesn't fail technically, but the human holding it remains entirely vulnerable to localized legal pressure. So, to map out the strategic blueprint, we're going to cover 5 key areas today. First, the domestic security myth. Second, the jurisdictional shield. Third, migrating legal ownership. Fourth, escaping exchange vulnerabilities. And finally, building the bulletproof exit. Starting right off with Section 1, the domestic security myth. And this brilliantly illustrates a core conflict we're dealing with here: technical encryption versus legal jurisdiction. Now, technical encryption, like cold storage and local hardware wallets, is phenomenal at what it does. It keeps unauthorized digital actors out, but it has absolutely zero defense against a domestic court order. Legal jurisdiction, on the other hand, utilizes offshore trusts and international legal frameworks. By shifting your focus from simply hiding your keys to legally removing them from your local jurisdiction, you create the only true way to neutralize a localized lawsuit. You are essentially taking the target right off your own back. Which brings us perfectly to Section 2, the jurisdictional shield. Think of a legal firewall as a physical barrier. Imagine a massive, impenetrable steel vault, but instead of being made of metal, it's constructed entirely out of foreign law. A legal firewall is an offshore entity structure that effectively strips a domestic court of its power to compel the transfer of digital property. So, if a local judge says, hand over the crypto, the legal firewall essentially means you simply don't have the legal authority to do so. And the foreign entity holding those assets, well, they aren't bound by that local judge's orders anyway. Now, when we talk about legal firewalls, the Cook Islands is universally recognized as the gold standard for asset protection. First off, they have an absolute refusal to recognize foreign judgments. A court order from your home country means literally nothing there. Second, if a creditor actually wants your assets, they are forced to fly all the way to the Cook Islands and relitigate the entire case from scratch under local Cook Islands law. And third, those local laws impose a near-impossible burden of proof on that creditor. It is a formidable, world-class legal fortress designed specifically to protect assets from aggressive litigation. Let's move on to Section 3, migrating legal ownership. Let's move to and see how this builds into an actual functional strategy. Getting assets into this fortress happens in 3 specific steps. Step 1 is to establish an irrevocable offshore trust entity, like the ones in the Cook Islands we just talked about. Step 2 is the actual transfer of legal ownership of your crypto assets from yourself as an individual directly into the trust. And step 3 involves the technical mechanics, implementing multi-signature setups. In this setup, a decisive key is held by an offshore trust protector. This ensures the private keys are physically and legally completely out of your home country's reach. You literally couldn't move the funds unilaterally even if you wanted to. The absolutely crucial point here is this transition from personal possession to legal stewardship. Once you transfer the assets to the irrevocable offshore trust, you no longer legally own those assets. And you know what? That is exactly how the strategy works. If you don't own it, a creditor cannot seize it from you. A judge cannot force you to hand over something you literally do not legally control. You become a beneficiary of the trust, for sure, but the legal title belongs to the offshore entity. Okay, moving to Section 4, Escaping Exchange Vulnerabilities. This quote from the source material is something every single digital asset investor needs to internalize. Keeping assets on centralized exchanges makes you a sitting duck for government-level freeze orders and subpoenas. I mean, think about it. Even if you have a brilliant offshore trust structure, if that trust just leaves its assets sitting on a mainstream, centralized exchange operating within your home country, those assets can be frozen with a single domestic subpoena. The exchange will always comply with local authorities. So let's break this comparison down to see how we actually neutralize these tracking and seizure threats. First, look at susceptibility. Centralized exchanges are highly vulnerable to freeze orders. The fix? Trust entities must use offshore institutional custody. Then there's privacy. Centralized exchanges leave easily traced paper trails. To combat this, the trust interacts with non-KYC or Know Your Customer liquidity pools. That means there's no identity data attached, effectively breaking that paper trail altogether. Finally, resilience. An ordinary exchange account fails forensic blockchain analysis almost instantly. But this offshore structure? It goes way beyond simple privacy coins. It's a comprehensive structural solution designed to survive even the most aggressive forensic blockchain analysis. And finally, Section 5, the bulletproof exit. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the sheer urgency of the timeline. Notice that very first step, pre-legal event. This is the absolute bedrock of the entire blueprint. You must create the irrevocable trust, transfer the assets, and complete the legal migration before a legal event occurs. If you try to do all of this after you've been sued or after a judge issues an order, courts will immediately view it as a fraudulent transfer. You cannot build a shield while the arrows are already in flight, right? You have to build it in peacetime. Executing this bulletproof exit also requires selecting the exact right partners. You need offshore fiduciaries who aren't just great lawyers, but who possess a deep, practical understanding of unique crypto security needs. They must have proven capability in managing hardware wallets and true expertise in handling and securing private keys. You're basically merging traditional offshore trust management with highly specialized cryptographic knowledge. If your trustee doesn't understand multi-sig or cold storage, well, the whole structure just falls apart. Which brings us to a final provocative thought for you to evaluate your own strategy. If a localized legal threat arrived tomorrow, is your digital legacy secured by mere technical encryption, or have you built an unassailable legal firewall? Because as we've seen today, hardware alone simply cannot protect you from a judge's gavel. True security requires marrying the cryptography of the blockchain with the impenetrable jurisdiction of an offshore trust. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I really hope this empowers you to secure your digital legacy. Keep learning, and I'll see you next time.